and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I've been dealing with suicidology, the study of suicide, for the purpose of helping people know if their friends want to commit suicide or if their relatives want to commit suicide. What do you do? How do you help them? How do you handle it? When do you bring them to a doctor? When do you sometimes even call the police? And so these next two segments, today's segment and next week's segment, is going to be critical in teaching you what to look for and what to do when you see something that you think is suspicious and how to handle it. So these two segments are going to be critical in terms of you learning what to do. So I hope if you're interested in this that you will watch especially these. I know everything that I've told you is important for the understanding of suicide, how it occurs, why it occurs, but on the other hand, you need to know what to do if somebody mentions to you that they're going to commit suicide. So what I'm dealing with in this segment is the clues and the cues that people give to let you know that they are about to commit suicide or that they are thinking about it, whether they have definite plans yet or not. It's on their mind. And you might want to know, why would anyone leave a clue? Why would anyone say anything? If they want to commit suicide, why don't they keep it to themselves? And why do they leave kind of hints that they're on the way to doing that? Well, a lot of people don't know that they're leaving hints. When you have to understand that when a person decides that they're interested in committing suicide, everything changes in their life at that point. When that decision is made, everything forms around the idea of suicide. All their thoughts, everything they do, somehow it interconnects with the idea that they will kill themselves. And so therefore they can leave clues and hints about it that they don't even know that they're doing. You know, if I were to think all the time about something I was about to do 6 months down the road, I'm not saying suicide, but anything, if I were to think about it all the time and it presented the core of what my thought patterns were, at some point I would probably say something. You know how hard it is for some people sometimes to keep a secret. You say, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. This is a surprise for somebody, a gift for somebody. And you come so close to saying something and giving it away. Well, in a way, it's a little bit like that they want to keep it secret. They want to do it. They may not want the world to know about it, but at some point they become so engrossed in the preparations and everything, as I said before, kind of forms around it, that what happens is they leave these little hints behind, and sometimes they don't know that they're doing it. Now, sometimes they do it deliberately. They do it because they may not be sure that they want to do it, and they don't want to go up to somebody and say, I'm thinking about suicide, help me. That seems to them a difficult thing to do. So they're leaving little hints here and there, hoping that somebody will catch on and intervene for them because they feel incapable of doing it themselves. So sometimes it's planned that people will know, so they'll intervene. And a lot of times the person is not sure that they want to do it either. They think they want to do it, but they're not sure they want to do it. So these hints that they leave, they hope people will step in and help them and do something for them. And of course you would if you knew. I had a very, very close friend of mine commit suicide, and this individual left no clues, no cues. I mean, some people don't, a lot of people do though, but she did not. And she was a close friend of mine, and she committed suicide. And the bad thing, I mean, it's always bad, but it was bad for me because I was scheduled to teach a seminar on suicide on the day that she was buried, and on the day of her funeral. And the family had asked me to go to the funeral, and it was on a day that I was scheduled to talk about suicide, the very thing that she did. And she had done it 3 days before my seminar. So I did the seminar. I didn't go to her funeral because I thought that the knowledge and the experience I had would be more helpful to somebody than it would be for me just to stay at a funeral and grieve, because I was grieving. So when I went in to teach the seminar, I told them, this is the day that my best friend is being buried because she committed suicide. But I am here teaching you a seminar on suicide because I feel it's more important for the lives that you can save for me to do this than just to go to her funeral. And everybody was very, very good about it. I went through it. I didn't have any trouble, and it worked out very well. But suicide, one thing you need to remember, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I'll talk more about it today. Suicide can be a very manipulative act. Now, I know I've told you it can be a rational act, because if a person is looking at their lives and they don't like what's going on, they can decide to commit suicide as a very rational approach, as an answer to whatever problems they're trying to eradicate. They are not mentally ill. At that point, they are making a rational decision based upon facts going on in their life. But it can become very, very manipulative. I don't know how many times I've heard of boyfriends saying to girlfriends, "You can't leave me because if you do, I'll commit suicide." And the girl usually stays with the boy because she's afraid he'll do it, and she's afraid that she'll be to blame. But what she needs to remember, as does everybody need to remember, no person is responsible for somebody else's life. They're responsible for their own life. And if a person decides to commit suicide, it's not anybody else's fault. It's their decision to do it. I can't force a person not to, but I can't force a person to do it either, not that I ever would. So you have to think of suicide as being manipulative, sometimes to get people to do what they want them to do, either to stay with them or not stay with them. You do this and I'm okay. If you do that, I'll kill myself, as if it's somebody else's fault. It's not somebody else's fault. So every person has to be responsible for their own life. Nobody else can do it for them. Well, let me get into the clues and the cues of suicide. You have, and I'll just look at this chart for a moment, direct clues, indirect clues. We're going to get into all of this as well. But verbally, there are verbal cues. Some of these verbal cues are direct and some of them are indirect, and this is what I want to talk about first. A direct clue would be a person coming up to you and saying, "I think I'm going to kill myself." That is very rare. Most people don't do it. Most people make it much more harder to catch on to the fact that they're thinking about it. Most people are not that verbal about it, and this is where it becomes manipulative. If a person comes up to another and says, "I'm going to kill myself," of course you take it seriously, because they may be serious about it. But sometimes it can be a manipulative maneuver. "I'm going to kill myself unless something happens." You would normally say, "Well, why would you do that?" or "What can be done to help you stop it, because we don't want you to do it," and therefore giving them power to tell you what to do or what not to do. So we normally don't see this except in a very manipulative situation, such as a boyfriend, as I mentioned before, talking to a girlfriend, saying that if you do this, then I'm going to kill myself. So that's a very direct clue. Most of the time you get indirect clues, and the statements are different. "You'd be better off without me." "I may not be here that much longer." "This life holds no promise for me. I may need to depart from it." There's a hint in all of these. The word suicide is not mentioned, but it's meant, and you can take and read it. You know, you can actually read it. It's usually more common than the direct approach of "I'm going to kill myself," but it gives you a hint that something's wrong. And it's usually sometimes left directly, "Oh yes, you're better off without me. I'm tired of life. I wished I could go on a long cruise and never come back. I wish I could take a long trip and no one would ever see me again." And there's lots of ways that they talk about that. But it's an indirect clue, because it's not saying directly that they are going to kill themselves. Now, there is an element of doom in these statements. "I'm getting tired of life. I wish it would end." Now, the word suicide is not mentioned, but it's hinted at. Now, what do you do when you hear that? If you hear that more than once, if you hear that several times, you ask them what they mean by it. "Well, what do you mean life would be better without you?" What do you mean you want to go on a long trip and not return? What does this mean to you? What are you really trying to tell me? And you try to get them to open up. I would never go to a person and say, what, are you trying to kill yourself or something? That's too forceful. But you've got to remember that just asking is not going to cause them to do it. A lot of people are afraid to say anything because they're afraid if they mention it, the person will go ahead and do it. It's like giving them permission to do it. That's not usually the case. I can't say it's not the case 100% of the time, but it's not usually the case. Usually if you ask them about it, that they feel relieved that somebody knows. And they feel relieved that they can open up and say, well, you know, I was thinking about something like that. They want to be recognized. They want people to know that they're thinking it. And hopefully the person will intervene and help them and get them help in some kind of way. And so they're not sure they want to do it, but they want to broach the subject to see how people will react. Will they help them? Will they understand them? And the relief that comes from knowing that you're not holding a secret anymore. Of course, some people will get angry because they didn't want you to find out and you did. They made it obvious enough, whether they realized it or not, and some people do realize it and some don't, but whether they realized it or not, they gave you the clue that they might be thinking about it, and you caught on to the clue and you confronted them with it. When I say confront, I don't mean be nasty. It means to ask questions. There's a difference between being confrontive and being assertive. But being assertive is usually rougher. It's usually more difficult. But you gently ask them, were you thinking about hurting yourself or something? I'm concerned about you. And then if they want to talk about it, you have opened the doors for them to discuss it. You've also opened the doors for them to get help. There's a story, this is a true story, and it's a sad one. It means that and I just want to tell you so that you know you can't take anything for granted. But I was working when I was a college professor. I got on a suicide team. I was on a team as a backup counselor, and there was a telephone call center. If anyone felt suicidal, they could call the center and people would talk with them. And then when things got too difficult, they would call me in as the counseling backup. And there's a story about a girl who talked to a man, called her and happened to get her. Every single time he called, he got the same person, and he kept threatening suicide and threatening suicide and threatening suicide. And she got tired of it because she thought he was just being manipulative. And so, you know, she kept trying to talk about it, but this went on day after day after day. Anytime she was on duty, he called. Now, I have no way of knowing if he knew when she was on duty, or whether it just happened to be that way, that it was kind of accidental. But one day she said, well, you know, you keep calling me all the time about suicide. If you want to do it, why don't you do it? And then she heard a gunshot. A shot went off. And he had killed himself. He was in a phone booth and he had killed himself, and they found his body, and she felt terrible about it because had she handled it a different way, then maybe it wouldn't have happened. But I think what should have happened was that when he kept calling day after day after day, she should have referred him to a psychologist. You know, I'd like to help you. I don't think I have the skills, so I want you to see a professional person. Maybe we can help to arrange for you to see a professional person to help you. Because most of these people who are on these phone banks talking to those calling in, they weren't professional, they were amateurs. But what they did was they got special training as to how to talk to a person who was suicidal. Because to call in, you had to admit that you were suicidal. It was a suicide hotline. So anyone who called in would be assumed to be suicidal. And she did not have the skills enough to stop it. And he was, I think, just waiting for somebody to give him permission to do it so he would do it. And she happened to be the one, and he did it. And it's a very sad story, but it does show, I mean, I don't blame her because no one can be responsible for somebody else's life. But at the same time, you have to realize there are right and wrong ways of handling things. And when you do it the right way, a person can get the help they need. And they were trained as much as they could be, but I don't think she ever called in a backup counselor because I would have to have seen him if she had called me. I would have seen him in an instant and gotten him probably to a psychiatrist for help. But the indirect clues, you'd be better off without me, with the element of doom, and it's harder to pick up, but it can be picked up. So we have the indirect. Now we have nonverbal cues. These are cues that people leave and they don't talk about it. We want to go into that. Some people will develop sleep problems. They can't sleep, or they sleep too much. Now here is something that's handy. It may be handy for you to know. If a person cannot fall asleep, usually it's because they're anxious. Now I'm saying this, but I also want to add this proviso to it. Assuming that a person has no medical issue that would cause them to wake up. For example, diabetics often wake up in their sleep because they have to use a restroom, or their blood sugar is too low, or something is not right, and then they have to check their blood sugar, and then they have to maybe give themselves insulin or maybe eat something if the blood sugar is too low. So you have some medical condition in which a person will wake up during the middle of the night. But if there's no medical condition that's causing it, a lot of people will not be able to fall asleep, and when they have a hard time falling asleep, and it's because they're anxious. Now the opposite is true. If a person falls asleep and they wake up frequently, it can be because they're depressed. It's kind of a rule of thumb. A depression will wake a person up. Anxiety will cause a person not to go to sleep. But you see, there's going to be a lot of individual variations on that, depending upon the medical conditions of the person that we're talking about here, whoever the person is. You can find a change in the eating habits. People eat too much, or they don't eat enough. So you have a change in eating habits. Giving things away, that's an important clue. People get attached to things. You get attached to your favorite collections. I know people who have collections of stamps and coins. I have a collection of instruments. I have a collection of stuffed animals. I have different collections. And you get attached to them. I mean, I have about 180 instruments in my collection. I wouldn't part with one of them. Whether they work or whether they don't, they're part of my collection. And a lot of these instruments have been given to me. So I'm attached to those instruments. I use most of them. I play most of them, but I'm attached to those instruments. But people have collections of things, or people have hobbies that they do. They make model aircraft or whatever. If they start to give those things away, that can sometimes be a clue that they're thinking about suicide or they're depressed. What they're trying to do is to give away the things that they love the most. Why? So they'll have a good home. You know, so they'll be taken care of. They don't want to leave things that they love behind, because who knows what's going to happen to them. Maybe they'll get tossed out. They want them to go to a person that'll appreciate them and will take care of them. So giving things away can be a very, very important clue. Making a will is something else that's important. If you make a will, or if your friends make a will, or change their wills. Now everybody should have a will, but a lot of people don't. And if they start to have one when they haven't had one before, or if they change it, that can be a clue that they're taking care of their lives. They're taking whatever loose ends they have and taking care of them so that they can die, and so they don't have a lot of things to worry about. They're at loose ends. So that's one of the clues too. Change in personal habits. In personal habits, if a person is messy, but now they're clean. If they're clean, but now they're messy. Anything that's unusual for them, then that's a clue too that something might be wrong, because their whole life has changed. You know, they suddenly start picking up, they suddenly start cleaning, they suddenly start giving things away, they suddenly start being careful about where their things going to go should they no longer be there. They make arrangements for things. It's like taking care of what they love so that they'll be taken care of after they're gone. And I want to mention too that 1 or 2 or 3 of these things by itself doesn't mean a person's suicidal, Because a person makes a will, I wouldn't assume that they're suicidal. But when you get a group of all these things acting together, and then you can get suspicious, especially if it's not common for the person, if it's different than what the person would normally act. If it's different than what a person would normally act and there's a group of things together, then you might want to intervene and you might want to say, well, what's going on here? You seem different. You're doing things differently. Are you not feeling well? Is there something wrong? And depending upon how they answer the question, then you have to think, is this person suicidal? And in order to ask them if they're suicidal, I wouldn't say, are you planning to kill yourself? That seems a bit rough, although under certain circumstances it would be appropriate. I would rather say, are you planning to hurt yourself in some way? Is there going to be such a major change in your life that we're going to be grieving about it? You know, let them know that you know, but approach them in a gentle fashion. And you need to know also, if you ask the question, you're not going to make them do it. Asking a person if they're going to do it in a gentle way is not going to cause them to do it. If anything, it will give them relief that somebody knows. They're carrying this weight on their chest, this huge weight of suicide. And the fact that somebody knows and wants to help and wants to give them relief can be a wonderful thing for them. So you don't have to worry about causing them to do it if you ask the question. You won't cause them to do it if you ask the question. But I wouldn't be rough about it either. I haven't quite finished what I want to do with this segment, but we're almost out of time, so I will close it here, and we'll continue with this next time. So please watch me then.